Hi everyone and welcome to the video. In this video, you're going to get my collective thoughts on every single Saints Row game played in the past week. The past week I've gone through every single title, both full-scale release, half-finished product, pretty much everything Saints Row related, and played as many as I can for as long as I can, to get my overall thoughts on the game and how it is in 2022, and if you were to pick up this game, what would I think of it? So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. It took a lot of time, collecting footage, collecting gameplay, actually playing the game and getting an opinion, so I do hope you enjoy. Leave a like, subscribe and all that stuff, and yeah, let's get straight into the video. So, starting off with Saints Row 1. First of all, I want to just say I'm going to be covering the single player aspect of these games, as some of these games have co-op or multiplayer, just single player to keep it nice and simple. Playing Saints Row 1 was really nostalgic. I haven't played the game in a good while with everything going on reboot-wise. I've been really focused on that, so, going back and playing a classic like this, it got me in my feels. There's a great intro sequence. The game's tone is really, dark with a tinsy bit of humour, and I personally like it. Its gameplay, whilst basic, is still really fun, and at its core it's what Saints Row should be. I think it's a really enjoyable game with lots of charm and characteristics to it that didn't exactly go over to the more recent Saints Row games. Its cast of characters is fantastic, its soundtrack's fantastic, and overall it's a really good play even in 2022. So I'd recommend picking this up. I'd give it like a solid 8 out of 10 in the Saints Row scale. So moving on, we have Saints Row 2. What a classic game, a game I absolutely adore, and probably my favourite in the franchise. So, looking at this game objectively, it is single-handedly the best title. It's undeniable that objectively, for its core foundation, it's the best game. It has easily the best split of humour to serious tone. It has some of the best writing in the series for sure, and obviously the mechanics that were introduced in this game were significantly better. Personal highlight for me is crib customization, a thing we kind of lost in the more recent games. However, it was slightly brought back in the reboot, not to the same extent. It was really unique, really fun, and it was something I really liked. The game felt fully fleshed out, it had tons of depth to it. The characters again were fantastic, with, it kind of leading on from the events of Saints Row 1, adding that bit of continuity and easy to follow storyline. All the characters are super likable and mostly in their best form. There's not many characters here I have to complain about being, better in other games. It was pretty much the peak of the series, and I do think that this is the ultimate Saints Row experience. It's not the best at everything. Graphically as well, I'd say it's aged the worst out of every single title, even the first game. I think it's pretty bad graphically, but besides that, and obviously its stability issues aren't fantastic, but if you can look past that, its core gameplay and the core game itself is fantastic, and it's 100% worth it in 2022. 10 out of 10 recommendation. In fact, make it 11. So, we're not moving on to Saints Row 3. No, we're actually going to go on to Saints Row Undercover, an unreleased PSP game. Now, I'm not going to be too deep on this one. I'm going to keep it really brief. The game's really fun, but it's obviously unfinished. It's really glitchy. It's really buggy. And again, graphically, of course, it doesn't really hold up. It's not worth a play in 2022, unless you're a hardcore Saints Row fan, in which case, yeah, go for it. But realistically, if you just like Saints Row and you're not a hardcore fan who wants to know everything about the franchise, you could probably go your life without playing it. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10 in 2022. Moving forward though, we have Saints Row the Third, an interesting title. Now, I hold Saints Row 3 dear to my heart for many reasons. It was my first ever Saints Row game, and I spent thousands of hours on it. It was a fantastic game back in the day, and I remember it being so fun. But looking at it more objectively and more recently, Saints Row 3 is probably the worst in the franchise of the full release games. It doesn't add anything remarkable and takes away a lot of what made Saints Row. It replaces the tone that the Saints Row games had had up to this point with completely new ones, and essentially it was a soft reboot. People like to look at it like it wasn't, that big of a difference and that the game was fine, but realistically this was a soft reboot of the franchise. It wasn't the Saints Row we had before. It was stripped of a lot of its character, and whilst I do love the game, it was not what Saints Row is about. Now, besides that, the game itself is pretty fun. It's a funny game, it's not too long, it's not too short, it's just a really, vibey game, and if you're in the right mood for some fun, then it's definitely worth a play. And I would still say it's worth playing in 2022, and I'm talking about both the original and the remaster in this, by the way. I'd say it's worth playing in 2022. It's just not the best. It's not the best option, and I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 in 2022. Pretty harsh, I know, but I really do think it stripped away a lot of what Saints Row was about. Now, before we move on to Saints Row 4, we're going to talk about Saints Row Money Shot, as I recently got to play that thanks to Mr. Saints Godzilla. So, having played this, again, I'll be brief, it was really fun, but it was obviously just a spin-off game, and if it was fully released, I'd say play it, and I'd say it was a good recommendation to play if it was fully released. Had a lot of charm, and it actually kind of summed up the Dex saga, and it's what I like to associate with the Dex saga. It was Dex was assassinated by an Altor assassin. It's the best we can do. But realistically, it's not too bad, and it's honestly quite fun to play, and if you're a Saints Row fan, I'd say go play it. If this thing was fully released, I'd recommend it pretty much the same as Saints Row the Third. In its own way, it's unique. It's it's not what Saints Row was about, but it ties into the older games, and I'd say it's worth it if you're a Saints Row fan. But because it's unreleased, I can't give it. I'm going to give it the same score as Undercover, although it was a more polished product. But the way you have to go about setting it up is just so much harder than Undercover, and realistically, in 2022, it scores about a 3 to a 3.5 out of 10. Saints Row 4. What an interesting title. My opinion on this is going to definitely raise some eyebrows, and I feel like I'm going to annoy quite a few people. Now, Saints Row 4 is definitely a personal favourite of mine. I really do love this game, and quite frankly, lots of nostalgia and memories come back from it. I played it pretty much in one of the happiest times of my life as well, which definitely added to how much I enjoy this game. And objectively, it is exactly that. It is a very fun game, and I think it's undeniable how much fun it still is to this day. Now, a lot of people didn't like it because it wasn't Saints Row, but in my mind, what Saints Row wasn't Saints Row for the past games. Saints Row 3 was not Saints Row. So I wasn't quite as offended by what Saints Row 4 had going for it, because it replaced what Saints Row was with a fun game with a ton of fan service. And it felt actually more Saints Row than Saints Row 3, because although it was wacky and wild, there was a lot of fan service and references back and characters appearing that relate to the older games, and for me, it felt more passionate, it felt more high quality, and it just felt like they wanted to give the old and new fans something they could have fun with. And quite frankly, I like that. And in 2022, it is still quite fun to play, and I would say it's still worth it 110%. It's the score that I'm going to give that I think is going to upset some people. Saints Row 4 in 2022, I'm going to give a solid 9 out of 10. I know, higher than Saints Row 1, but hear me out. It, by modern standards, is a more modern game. It, in a way, it's graphically good. It's not fantastic, but it's graphically good. It's very fun. Its story makes sense. It's easy to follow, and if you haven't played the previous games, you don't need to know what's going on. On top of that, it has the bonus of being able to please both the new and old fans, as old fans got a lot of fan service to characters they love in the series, and newer fans got the wackier gameplay that they all loved. And in my opinion, it has some of the greatest DLC ever released for a Saints Row game with the Saints Save Christmas. Yes, I am still a huge fanboy of that. Saints Row 4 definitely set a new standard for what Saints Row was, and quite frankly, it was a direction I'm glad they did not follow. But for this one-off title, this one-off game that is in the Saints Row franchise, I love it. It is probably my second favourite Saints Row behind 2. And it took me a long time to really come to terms with that, because I know that really annoys people, but I love it. And, it's got a kick-ass radio station, it's got fun-ass gameplay, a really cool villain, a really cool story, and quite frankly, it's not Saints Row, but it is Saints Row at the same time, and they've somehow managed to find a balance that, whilst not pleasing everyone, had something for everyone. And I think that's honourable in its own way. Saints Row 4 is a great title by today's standards, and I do wholeheartedly recommend it, whether you're a new Saints Row fan, old Saints Row fan, or not a Saints Row fan. It is a very fun game. Which leaves us with the one title remaining, the Saints Row reboot. Yes, what an interesting one. Now, I'm trying to look at this game as a new beginning for the franchise, because that's what it is. I'm not going to, talk about what Saints Row was before to what it is now, because that's the point of a reboot. They want to reimagine what Saints Row is, whilst keeping some of the core characteristics, which I understand. But with a new cast of characters that aren't very likeable, and a story that's quite frankly bad. It's not the easiest sell in the world, but what I will say is the gameplay makes up for it. The gameplay is really good, and it is quite fun, and even though it's not the best thing in the world, the gameplay is still really enjoyable, and it's a very fun game. The map as well is really good. It's a big high point in the series for me. It's probably my favourite map, and when the update comes out, which is another thing I want to talk about in a minute, when the update comes out, I think it's going to be drastically improved with the NPCs kind of being more prevalent there. Talk about the updates, it's also going to be getting frequent updates, so if you were to pick it up now in 2022, you at least have a bit of a game's lifespan to go through as it being a new title. You'll get some more stuff, and then the DLC is on the way too, which hopefully is going to be at least somewhat good story-wise. Driving is really fun as well, customization's really good. It does add a few new features that I really like, and overall, it's a mixed bag. It's not the best Saints Row game by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely think it's better than Saints Row 3, and it's just not as good as Saints Row 1 or 4. Which is why the final verdict for the Saints Row reboot comes down to a 6.5 to 7 out of 10 in 2022, which might change depending on how the updates go and how the DLCs go. If the DLCs come out and the expansions are really good, deep story, a story I can get into with the characters being more likable, then hell, I can raise that score. But at its current state, I think a 6.5 to 7 seems fair. It's missing a lot of features and they either need to be added back or just kinda left at this point. I don't really know what would fix the reboot's features and its story, but if they can try and do it with a DLC and expansion pass and these content updates, I think it can improve. It's just, with the game in its current state, at this point in the gaming market, you would expect more, which makes it a bit of a hard sell, which is why I think it is deserving of its 6.5 to 7 out of 10. Of course, like I said, I would love to see this bumped up in the future so I can enjoy this game even more. The only reason I would even rank this game above Saints Row 3 is because while both the stories suck, the reboot has a bit more to offer. Which is why when people say it's the worst Saints Row ever, I find that hard, because although the stories both suck in 3 and the reboot, and even if the reboot story is worse than 3's, they're both bad. Bad enough that you don't care about them regardless. I feel that while 3 did the story perhaps a bit better, it just doesn't have enough redeeming qualities to it. Like, besides having a kind of fun story, there's not many redeeming qualities to Saints Row 3. It's quite an annoying game with lots of features no one really wanted. And at least the reboot can say it's got a better map than Saints Row 3, better customization than Saints Row 3, better driving than Saints Row 3, more mechanics that Saints Row 3 didn't have. It's just got a bit more to it. And for me, that is why I can rank it above 3 confidently, but can't rank it above stuff like Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 4. Because the stories in those games are good enough that I care about them, and the gameplay is good enough that I don't think it makes up for what the reboot can offer. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that boring stuff. And I'll see you all in the next video. See you guys.